Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Educated Collins Snap channel. How you doing? Today, we're going to be talking about the Sacred Timeline. So this is the new featured location for the next 2 days. It's an interesting one, similar to the raft. Let's get into it. So, Sacred Timeline, we don't have the image for it, but we do have the description and its text. First to fill this location gets a copy of their opening hand. Now, the opening hand is the first three cards that you get. Some of you might think it's four cards, but it's the first three cards that you get in the beginning of the game. So when you fill this location up, three more cards. So that's opens up some interesting strategies there. It's feature location, so you're going to see it 40% of the time. But let's talk about some of the synergies that you might want to be thinking about when you're adjusting your deck for feature locations. So I do want to say feature locations are more towards the ignorable side. You actually don't have to change your deck much because you only get to see it 4% of the time. And a feature location like this isn't game breaking. A lot of the time, you're not. It's not like they auto win or anything like that if they complete the raft. And if they do complete the raft, right, they have to have strategies that can buff cards in the raft, or they're basically giving you a free lane. So it's not. I wouldn't say this is one where you have to play around it. Where Plundered Castle and something like that. That one was a little bit not ignorable. Same thing with Collapsed Mines. You couldn't ignore that one. This one is more closer to ignorable. All right. So first things first, we've got Wasp, we've got Yellow Jacket. Now, both of these cards I think are going to be pretty good because they're zero cost and you can play them into the the Sacred Timeline, and you're going to get some value off of that. So if these start in your hand, if you these will really help you be the first to complete it, and then you're going to get another copy of them back. So if you have a deck that can really utilize those bodies, this can be a pretty powerful effect. Next up, we have cards like Nova, so cards that can buff the board. If you get two copies of Nova on your field, that can be really useful. Synergies with Killmonger, whatever. So, do you think cards like Nova has a place? Quinjet always seems to be good when it comes to secret locations. They always seem to add cards. Anytime you're getting free cards in your deck, Quinjet has to be mentioned. Being able to reduce their cost by one can be really, really strong. So this with Moon Girl can be a very powerful combo. Titania, so Titania kind of represents cheap one drops, cheap but powerful one drops, right? They allow you to actually complete the location, and then they also are strong, give you a ton of points. And as long as they're not really messing with you, killmongering your cards, this can be a really good way to get some points. Collector, it I wouldn't say is like a powerful piece to add, but if it does proc, it's 3 points. It's something I wanted to put it in. Mojo, right? People are going to be fighting for that timeline location. Mojo is a potentially 8 power 2 drop. That's pretty insane. So this can be a very powerful tool to add. And then we have, of course, anytime there's feature locations, I always have to mention Scarlet Witch and Storm. Those are kind of MVP for ignoring whatever a location could do. You just say, I don't really care about that. I'm just going to change the location. So they are also a tool here. It makes a lot of sense. Very easy to swap the location if you think you're not going to win it. And then Viper I think has an interesting mechanic here. Since people are going to be playing into that location, you can just give them your dead cards, right? Give them a hood or something, and that could be really annoying, really annoying because even though they might get the 3 cards, there's a good chance they lose that lane, and they can't recover, right? Because they might not get anything insane from the first three. It's not like the raft where you're getting a powerful 6 drop. You're just getting 3 cards back that still cost energy, so you're not really gaining too much. So just playing into their fears and giving them an extra card that's not that strong might actually be the way to turn this location on its head. And then Brood, I think Brood's gonna be really strong. It fills 3 locations, so it's very easy to activate the location with a single Brood. So this can be very, very powerful. And then I think Killmonger will be also very useful. People will be running 1-drops most likely. So decks that can incorporate Killmonger should have this lead. And those are like the cheap options. Now let's talk about the more expensive options here. So I've talked about Moon Girl a little bit. I think Moon Girl can be really powerful in conjunction with some of the next cards that we're going to be talking about. Thanos just in there just because the stones are pretty cheap, and Space Stone, you can fill a location with Space Stone, then move a card out of there, and so you're not fully deadlocked in that one location. So Thanos should have a decent place in this feature location. And then Devilsaur, getting 3 cards for free. Devilsaur loves that, so that's going to be really powerful for the Dino. And then She-Hulk and Death, cards that can reduce cost, I think have a really sneaky power play, right? You if those 2 start in your hand and you get extra copies of Death, extra copies of She-Hulk, well, that can really blow your opponent away, right? That can really surprise them where if you have Moon Girl and you can empty your hand quick enough, you can theoretically have 4 copies of Death on for your turn 6, and you're just like, well, here's 4 copies of Death. Here, like imagine you play both of them. Here's 3 copies or 2 copies of She-Hulk, 4 copies of Death. That's my turn. That's my turn 6. How you doing? Like it could be really powerful. So definitely those 2 cards could be a premium edition, something you can catch people off guard with. So really did want to theory craft some decks utilizing those cards. So now I just want to say, building decks from scratch for every feature location is pretty tough, right? So and feature locations are usually on the lower level of importance, since you're only seeing 40% of the time. You do not ever want to make decks that can't win without the feature location. That is a big no-no. You're better off starting from scratch. So basically, the best way I feel to utilize feature locations is to take an already existing deck and then adjust it. Either use it verbatim or adjust it to kind of fit that niche of the feature location while retaining its original strong components. So I do have a couple deck ideas for this feature location. They might not all be hits, but if any of them are intriguing you, feel free to try it out and see. Let me know how they go. So the first one I really went into the brew, the deck building brew lab, and really came up with a pretty interesting list, I think. So this is a Deathwave deck with She-Hulk, and it has some other sneaky components. I have the Wasp in there because you can get rid of it with the Deadlock or the Carnage, and it can fill that location up really fast. So I think Wasp just makes a lot of sense. Then you have Hood and Nova. These are Yondu cheap 1-drops to play in there that can also just die. So you're never really locked into that Sacred Timeline location, even though you might fill it up super fast. Then we have the classic Death package. We have Bucky Barnes Carnage, Killmonger Deathlock, right? So these are just giving you death activations to cheapen the death. Then we have this Moon Girl here. So the Moon Girl is pretty interesting. I think Moon Girl is already a common staple for Deathwave, but with this Sacred Timeline ability, you might be able to get 2 copies of She-Hulk, 2 copies of Death, something like that. And so if you Moon Girl the double copies of She-Hulk or especially Death, right? You can have up to 4 copies of those cards in your hand. And turn 5, you can either do something like do nothing turn 5, and then your 4 copies of She-Hulk, whoop, all goes down to 1 mana. That's pretty sick. Or you could play Wave, and then the She-Hulks will go down to 2 mana, so that's still good. But then your deaths, as long as you get 4 kills, right? Yondu's gonna make it easy. Hood's gonna make it maybe easier. Wasp is a free target. As long as you get those 4, that still costs 0, and you can just drop down these deaths. So I'm definitely going into, like, I'm spending too much time on this one, but I spent a lot of time like theory crafting a deck I think could work, and I think this one could be a pretty fun one. I would try it if I had She-Hulk, but I don't, right? So I can't try it yet. But it sounds good. It sounds good to me. All right, moving on. Let's move on. Next one we have this Patriot Surfer. So once again we have Wasp, right, which allows you to actually contest that lane early, and you also have Brood. So turn 3, if it's not taken, you brood it up, you get the lane. So that's pretty cool. And then you also have the good targets to get copies of. You have Silver Surfer is a great target. Patriots is a great target. Mystique, if you have Patriot, can be a great target. So you have a lot of these cards that you don't mind getting second copies of. Even Wasp, right? If you have a good Patriot setup, can be pretty good. So you have a lot of ways to make the build pop, and it just seems like a nice solid build that works even without the location, but can feel a little bit better with the location. Next up, we have this, I guess, classic Zabu Dino Arrow She-Hulk deck. I don't know what to call it, but classic Zabu Dino She-Hulk deck. This one, I would say, doesn't really have the easiest time actually completing Sacred Timeline first. So that's probably going to be its biggest weakness in terms of that feature location. You're probably not going to get the Sacred Timeline. But this is just a good build regardless, and that's why I would recommend it, because it's just a good build. And if you happen to activate the Sacred Timeline, well, this build just gets better and better. So it's definitely a good starting point. You could maybe tweak it if you think, oh, I'd rather have this one card or blah blah blah. But I think this is a solid build regardless. And then if you happen to complete Sacred Timeline, it's just even better. Then next up, we have this more Ocean Mud inspired Arrow She-Hulk deck. So this one instead has a little bit more 1-drops to contest into the timeline to actually activate it, right? So you fight really hard in the early game, and then getting extra copies of cards can allow you to go maybe double She-Hulk later on, especially with Quinjet, right? That She-Hulk can be free. So it could also make you go like Arrow turn 5, Arrow turn 6. That could be pretty annoying. So I think this one also makes a lot of sense because it's a good deck regardless. But then if you can complete the timeline, it just gets even better. And finally, I believe we have just a classic Surfer deck. So this one's just a regular-ish. You know, I made some adjustments. Surfer deck, but I put the Wasp in. I put some 1-drops in. Even a Quinjet, even though the Quinjet doesn't really make that much sense. It's just in case you get that feature location, you could make it work. And then you have that Sarah activation to play triple 3s on turn 6, or if you have Quinjet down and you activate the Sacred Times line, you can get even more cards. You can just flood the board. So I think this could be a potential way to play the game. I'm a little bit less confident about this since the Quinjet is kind of awkward if you're not playing that location and also winning it. So there are some caveats here, but I think those are good starting points. If you have a very similar deck, you can maybe use something similar and then start adjusting and building to see what makes sense to you. So those are my tips, my ideas for this location. it should be an interesting one. It's one you can mostly ignore since you can just Scarlet Witch it away or storm it away. And even if they get that activation, it doesn't mean you've instantly lost. They still have to pay for those cards. If they are running a synergistic deck with Quinja and stuff like that, then you might be a little bit worried. If they Moon Girl, you might be a little bit worried. But overall, I think it's a decent location, a little bit better than the constant death synergistic feature locations that we've seen in the past. So definitely don't mind this one. But that's all I have for you today. Hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next one.